It all started on a night that seemed way too ordinary for Elamar, but not for Corvin. The sky was ripped open with thunder that sounded more like the roars of sleeping titans, and the wind tasted like change. It was right there in the middle of that insane storm that the old scar on his arm began to burn like live fire. It wasn't pain, it was as if something deep inside was screaming for freedom. Corvin staggered on the airship's balcony, his chest tight, and when he looked up, the clouds were swirling like the eyes of an ancient monster about to wake. He didn't know why, but he felt it. This was just the beginning. The next day he barely had time to process what had happened. His arm still throbbed, and then he heard the high-pitched sound of rotors slicing through the sky. 3 heavily armored ships with the Clan Hunter symbol appeared out of nowhere, and they weren't there for a chat. Corvin grabbed his backpack, snatched his old communicator, and ran. The skywalks trembled under his feet while plasma shots sliced through the air, making the poles explode in sparks. The escape wasn't just physical. It was as if something deep inside was trying to wake up, a memory that wasn't his. A voice whispered his name like it had known him from forgotten eras. With the help of Tyra, a rebellious pilot with a cynical smile and nerves of steel, and Malon, a former cartographer who swore he'd never trust anyone again, Corvin barely managed to shake off the hunters. They landed on a floating island called Varen's Drift, a graveyard of airships and forgotten technology. Tyra swore no one would find them there. But Corvin's scar was pulsing too strongly, like a beacon calling things that shouldn't be awakened. It was when Malon, examining his arm with an old scanner, turned pale. There was a map, alive. Magical lines moved under his skin, forming routes, runes, and symbols lost for centuries. Not knowing what to think, Corvin followed the 2 to the coordinates flashing on the scanner. Stormhaven, a ruined city sunk among the clouds, buried under layers of raw electricity and eternal storms. Getting there felt like crossing the throat of a thunderstorm. Everything was shaking. Everything was about to collapse. But when he stepped into the ruins, something in the air recognized his presence. Gates opened, stones floated, and the city's scars began to glow as if Elamar herself was trying to remember who she was. In the center of the old council tower, a crystal artifact shot a beam straight into Corvin's eyes. And then the vision came. A boy crying in the rain, surrounded by hooded figures, an oath of silence, and a name, one he'd never heard but echoed in his chest like home. Son of the Lightning. When he woke up, Tyra and Malon were staring at him like they'd seen a ghost. He tried to explain, but he didn't even know where to begin. How do you tell someone you might be part of something too ancient, something no one dared to touch for centuries? Malon shut down. He said he'd heard stories like this in the old Sentinel's archives, about a lost heritage of the Arcanes, warriors who controlled the very sky with their hands. But he also spoke of betrayals, of blood spilled between brothers, of legacies that devoured those who inherited them. Corvin laughed, a nervous laugh. Wasn't this what he had been running from his whole life? The weight no one else wanted to carry? And now there he was, with a magical map on his skin and visions of a past that wasn't his, but called to him like it always had been. They spent the night trying to decipher the map, each line revealing forgotten places, hidden portals, and symbols that reacted to Corvin's voice. Tyra, with her suspicious attitude, seemed reluctant, but something in her eyes said she'd seen too much to pretend this was just a coincidence. Malon, on the other hand, started pulling away. There was fear in his voice. He knew the tales about Stormhaven, about the power sleeping in the ruins, about the Black Lightning cult, a fanatical group that believed ruin was the true way to free the world. Corvin didn't know what awaited him, but deep down he felt that running was no longer an option. The scar kept glowing, and now it whispered. Meaningless words, memories that weren't his, faces he'd never seen. Something inside him was waking up. Something that made the sky respond to his touch, that attracted thunder like he was a magnet for chaos. The storm wasn't outside. It was him. The next morning, before the sun rose, he stood there on top of the destroyed tower, watching the horizon burst into sparks and black clouds. Tyra approached, threw the hood over her head, and said just one thing: "If we're really doing this, then we go all the way." Corvin nodded. He still didn't know what this was, but he knew there was no turning back. Because from that point on, every step was toward ascension or total destruction. And as they descended the steps of that forgotten city, an invisible shadow followed them. An ancient echo, camouflaged in the sound of the winds. Something was watching them. something that had waited for a long, long time, for the return of the heir of the storm. The wind sliced through the dark sky like a sharp blade as Corvin, Tyra, and Malon moved through the vastness of the ruins. The living map under Corvin's skin pulsed with growing energy, guiding them like a mystical compass toward something they could barely understand. The storm was forming above them, like an invisible presence watching their every move, ready to unleash all its fury. Tyra looked at Corvin with a look of anxiety, her eyes still reflecting the marks of the previous battle. "We're next," she said, her voice filled with a fear she was trying to hide. "Something's wrong. I can feel it." Malon, quieter than usual, stared at the horizon, his senses sharp, trying to figure out what was coming. "This storm isn't natural," he murmured, his eyes fixed on the dark clouds swirling in circles. "Corvin, you feel it too, right? The power? It's like the whole sky is watching us." The air was heavy, and the smell of ozone hinted at something big. Something that would change everything. As they neared a steep mountain, the sound of thunder echoed through the land, like a distant roar. But it wasn't just the storm's sound. It was Althek's temple itself, almost like it was breathing, its stone walls pulsing as if alive. The massive structure, covered in moss and relics of a forgotten time, seemed to be waiting for them. "This is it," Corvin said, his voice deep, like he was finally finding his way in a sea of chaos. "This is the place." With a decisive move, Corvin placed his hand on one of the temple's columns, and a wave of electricity shot through his body. The storm around them grew stronger, but Corvin didn't back down. He knew this was the moment. The entrance opened before them, like the temple itself was inviting them in, daring them to dive deeper into a dark and mysterious past. Inside the temple, the walls were covered with ancient inscriptions, lit by a pulsating light that seemed to come from within the temple itself. As they moved forward, the ground started to tremble, and a giant figure materialized before them, a guardian, an entity of lightning and wind. "You dare challenge the sanctuary of the thunder?" The creature roared, its voice like thunder echoing through the walls. Its eyes glowed with the storm's fury, and its hands crackled with bolts of electricity dancing in the air. Corvin, heart racing, stared at the guardian. He knew he couldn't hesitate. The storm's power, which had been inside him all along, needed to be released now. He took a deep breath, and when the guardian lunged, he stretched out his hand, feeling the energy pulse through his skin, warming him, making him stronger. The battle that followed was epic, a dance of lightning and fire, where every move seemed capable of tearing reality apart. Finally, with one last strike, Corvin touched the first thunder key, and a surge of energy filled his body. His vision blurred, and he saw flashes of his past, fragments hidden deep within his soul. The power he had unleashed was beyond anything he'd imagined. But before he could fully understand what was happening, a new presence made itself known. The sky grew even darker, and Corvin felt a chill run down his spine. Something was coming, something far more dangerous than the Guardian itself. The Black Lightning cult was on the move, and they weren't far. The battle was far from over, and Corvin knew the price of ascension would be high. A tough choice awaited him, and the consequences of his actions would echo across the world. But amid all the chaos, Corvin's destiny was finally starting to unfold. There was no going back. The sound of the howling wind became deafening as Corvin, Tyra, and Malon left Althek's temple behind, their minds racing with what had just happened. The power of the Thunder Key pulsed inside Corvin, burning through his veins like he was being consumed by a force bigger than himself. He still didn't fully understand what he had awakened, but he knew the storm wasn't just a metaphor. What he had unlocked in that temple had touched something deep and dark, something that was now hunting him. Tyra, always cautious, looked at him with concern. "Corvin, what was that? What did you touch in that temple?" "I felt this energy." She paused, trying to find the words. It was like the sky itself was ripping apart. Malon, on the other hand, seemed more distant, his gaze fixed on the trees around them as if something was moving in the darkness. "It wasn't just that," he said quietly. "We need to run. The Black Lightning cult knows you touched the key. They were waiting for this." Corvin stopped abruptly, feeling the weight of Malon's words. The Black Lightning cult. He knew the name, a deadly secret organization that followed a path of destruction and domination, worshipping the primal forces of nature, especially lightning, thunder. They were after what Corvin had just unleashed, and there would be no limits to what they'd do to get it. The cult won't rest until they have what they want, Malon said, with a coldness Corvin couldn't ignore. They know the power of thunder isn't something that's easy to control. But you, Corvin, you're part of this now, and they're coming for you. The weather started changing again. The clouds that had formed at the temple were beginning to descend, like the very atmosphere was getting thicker and heavier. The air, now charged with electricity, made Corvin's hair stand on end, and he felt a presence, a shadow that seemed to be drawing closer. "They're here," he whispered. And then, like a snap, they appeared. Dark clouds formed around them, and from the shadows, hooded figures emerged, their eyes glowing with the light of lightning. The members of the Black Thunder cult had arrived, and they weren't alone. With them, a colossal and terrifying being, the cult's executor, walked with heavy steps, each one echoing like thunder. "You touched the key, Corvin," one of the figures said, their voice low and menacing, like it came from a deep abyss. "Now you belong to us. The fate is already sealed." The cult's executor, a massive creature wrapped in lightning, raised its hand, and the skies started vibrating. Corvin could feel the power gathering against him, an almost unbearable pressure. He knew he wouldn't be able to face this alone. He needed something else, a strength he didn't fully understand yet. "You have to unleash it," Tyra said, her eyes fixed on him, like she knew exactly what was running through his mind. "Unleash the power inside you. You can't run from it anymore." Corvin looked up at the sky, where the black clouds were starting to condense, a storm about to break into pure chaos. He felt the power growing inside him, feeling the lightning like a new heartbeat, something he never imagined. He took a deep breath, and with his hand raised to the sky, let out a scream. The power of the lightning key shot out like an explosion of pure energy, lighting up the night with a blinding flash. The cult members recoiled, their shadows momentarily dissipated by the intensity of the power. But the executor, now with eyes glowing with uncontrollable fury, charged forward with even more violence. "You don't understand what you're doing," it growled, its voice distorted. "The storm you've created is going to destroy everything. You're helping us unleash the true power." Corvin, however, didn't retreat. He could feel the storm inside him, the storm of lightning and chaos. It was his power, something he needed to master. He looked at his friends. Tyra and Malon were by his side, ready to fight to the end. "No, I'm controlling this," Corvin said, his voice firm but filled with rising tension. He could feel the thunder tearing through his soul, every lightning bolt like a war cry. The battle had just begun. They weren't just hunters and prey anymore. The real challenge started now. And the Black Thunder cult wouldn't be defeated easily. But Corvin knew that the biggest test was yet to come. They were on the edge of something much bigger, and the battle ahead could decide the fate of the entire world. With every movement, the sky roared, and lightning seemed to be the only guide left. The storm raged around them, a natural force impossible to ignore, but inside Corvin, the lightning kept growing, pounding against his skin and soul, challenging him to understand its true origin. He looked at Tyra and Malon, knowing that the battle ahead wasn't just against the Black Thunder cult, but against a fate he still couldn't fully grasp. What would happen if he couldn't control the power now coursing through his veins? The only thing he knew for sure was that everyone's future depended on the choices he made. The executor of the cult advanced with disturbing calm, its body wrapped in pure energy, as if it was a physical manifestation of the storm tearing through the sky. "You still don't get it, Corvin," it said, its voice booming like the rumble of distant thunder. "The key you touched wasn't just a tool, it was a link to the primordial power of lightning. Now you're connected to something bigger than you can imagine. And you're going to help us release it." Corvin felt a shiver. He knew the executor's words weren't just a threat, they were an unsettling truth. The lightning wasn't simply inside him. He was becoming a part of it, with immense power but also with an overwhelming weight. "That's not gonna happen," Tyra said firmly, her sword gleaming in the storm's light. She knew Corvin's power was something beyond mortal, but she also knew he couldn't control it on his own. "We fight by your side, Corvin. No matter how impossible it seems." Malon, calmer, seemed to be studying every move the cult members made, his eyes sharp and calculating. "They don't understand what we're up against. Lightning isn't just a force of destruction. It's also a catalyst for rebirth. Maybe this is what fate has in store for us. Not an end, but a chance to start over. But for that, we need to understand what it really wants from us." But the executor laughed, a shrill sound that echoed like thunder in his chest. "Rebirth? You talk like it's something you have a choice in. Lightning brings nothing but destruction. And you guys are gonna help make it even stronger. Corvin felt the pressure build. The storm was inside him and outside of him, and he knew he had to do something before it was too late. He couldn't keep ignoring the power being unleashed. The lightning was calling him, and he could feel the response vibrating in every cell of his body. He looked up at the sky, and for the first time he saw the lightning not as an enemy, but as an extension of himself. "I'm not your slave," Corvin said, a new determination in his voice. "And I won't let this power destroy everything around me." He reached out his hand to the sky, electricity starting to gather around his fingers, pulsing with an overwhelming force. The lightning seemed to accept his authority, like he had finally embraced his role in fate. The storm responded, not with blind fury, but with controlled energy, a surge of power that he now knew how to command. "You can try to control me, but lightning isn't something you can own," Corvin said, his voice now full of renewed strength. He looked straight at the executor. "You might have chased power your whole life, but you'll never understand its true nature. And that's the difference between us." The executor hesitated, maybe for the first time, showing a weakness Corvin hadn't expected. But soon the sneer returned to his face. "You think you can control lightning, Corvin? The power you're awakening is unpredictable. It'll destroy you before you have a chance to understand. Doesn't matter how many of us you beat. We'll come back, and when we do, you'll already be consumed." "Maybe," Corvin replied, his eyes glowing with the intensity of the lightning. "But not now. I'm not the only one who has power over this. Fate wasn't written just by you." In one swift move, he channeled the energy of the lightning through his body and released it in an explosion so powerful that the trees around him were ripped from the ground, and the cult members instinctively recoiled. The sky lit up like it was being torn in two, and the sound of 1,000 thunders roared at once, creating a wave of destruction and pure power. The storm became a force centered on Corvin, and the cult members, now aware that he was in control, were at a crossroads. They couldn't fight him directly anymore. They needed something else. "Don't underestimate what you've started," the executor said, his voice now laced with venom that made the air vibrate. "This isn't over, Corvin. Lightning never forgives." Corvin didn't know what would come next, but he knew the battle wouldn't end there. Whatever fate had in store for him, he was now ready to face it. The storm still raged around him, but he wasn't afraid anymore. In fact, he was beginning to understand that, in the end, he wasn't just a victim of the lightning. He was its master. And as the sky continued to churn, the truth was clear. The storm had only just begun. The sound of the lightning echoed through the air, reverberating in every cell of Corvin's body. He no longer felt fear, only a constant presence, an indescribable energy flowing through him. The sky seemed to be at war with itself, the dark clouds swirling with the same intensity as the power Corvin had unleashed. The Black Lightning cult had retreated, but Corvin knew the victory wasn't guaranteed yet. They would come back, and with them, the greatest challenges of his life. But now he wasn't alone anymore. The true force of the lightning was with him, inside him, and that changed everything. Tyra, by his side, watched with a look of both concern and hope. She knew Corvin had become more than just an ordinary man, more than anyone could have imagined. The lightning was no longer just a destructive power, but something more complex, deeper. It was like he had become a channel between worlds, the mortal world and the unknown realm where the lightning came from. But she also knew that, with this power, came an immense responsibility. To carry a force so destructive was both a blessing and a curse. "Corvin," Tyra started, her voice full of a seriousness he rarely heard. "You get what this means, right? It's not just about controlling the power. You're gonna need something else now. You're gonna need to understand what lightning really is." Corvin looked at her, feeling the unease in her words. "I know. It's not just power. I need to understand who I am now. What the lightning wants from me." Melan, who usually kept quiet, stepped forward. "You're not in this alone. The lightning chose you, yeah, but you've got something no one else does. Power doesn't define you. What you choose to do with it, that's what really matters." Melan's words hit deep, packed with that quiet wisdom he always carried. Corvin had heard that kind of talk before, but now it felt urgent, real. He couldn't let the power inside him take over. Couldn't let it twist who he was. Yeah, he had a destiny to fulfill, but it wasn't carved into the flames of the lightning. It was right there, in his hands. Out of nowhere, a dark shadow rose on the horizon. The cult of the Black Bolt was back, and with them came the worst of them all, the Lightning Master. That creature had been banished ages ago to the deepest pit of the Shadow Realm. Now he was back. His face was twisted with hate, and just being near him made the air feel heavy, like the light itself was getting swallowed up. He wasn't even human anymore. He was a storm, walking, breathing, pure destruction in a cloak. You think you can control the lightning, Corvin? The Master's voice boomed like thunder, shaking the ground. You're just starting to grasp what it really means. The lightning doesn't forgive. It demands sacrifice. And you'll pay just like everyone else who dared to fight it. Corvin didn't flinch. He braced himself, feeling that electric surge rise inside him again, raw, untamed. But this time something was different. The fear that used to choke him? Gone. Now it was something stronger, confidence. Like he finally knew he wasn't fighting alone. He looked over at Tyra and Malon and felt it, like destiny had stitched all their lives together for this exact moment. They were ready for whatever came next. I'm not alone, Corvin said, his voice steady. And you're gonna learn, Lightning Master, that real power isn't about destroying. It's about knowing when, and how, to use it. The battle that exploded after that was brutal. Every strike lit up the sky like a war of gods, bolts of energy tearing through the air. But somewhere in the chaos something shifted. Corvin stopped trying to fight the storm and started moving with it. He wasn't resisting anymore, he was sinking with it. The lightning wasn't his enemy. It was a force, a rhythm, a dance. And he was finally learning the steps. He raised his arms to the sky, not just to strike but to connect. And when he did, a surge of pure light shot down, not only blasting the Lightning Master with everything he had, but clearing the shadows from the sky above. When the final shockwave faded, the Master of Lightning was down, his body fading into smoke and nothingness. The cult of the Black Bolt, without their leader, panicked and scattered. Corvin dropped to his knees, exhausted but smiling. He looked at his friends and for the first time it felt like peace. This ain't the end, Malon said, walking up beside him. This was just the beginning. The lightning's not going anywhere. But now, you know how to control it. Tyra stepped in, eyes full of pride, and placed a hand on Corvin's shoulder. You chose to be the guardian of this power. The lightning might fade one day, but what you're leaving behind? What you'll teach others? That's forever. Corvin smiled and turned toward the horizon. The sky, once wild and roaring, was finally calm. The lightning didn't feel like a curse anymore. It felt like a reflection of him. His journey was far from over, but now? He had the strength, the clarity, and the people to face whatever was coming. As the sun began to dip low, Corvin took one last look at the sky, clear, still, and glowing. Inside him, a new kind of energy pulsed. Not just power, but purpose. The power to choose, the power to hope, and above all, the power to stay in control. The lightning had finally met its true master. And with that, a new path lit up ahead. Even as the last clouds drifted off into the distance, Corvin could feel the weight of everything he'd just been through, but also the lightness of something new starting. He'd faced the biggest challenge of his life and come out stronger. The lightning wasn't just about destruction anymore. It was rebirth, change, and now he was its keeper, its guardian, its voice. Tyra stood next to him, smiling with that knowing look. You did more than survive, Corvin. You turned a curse into a gift. The lightning's yours now. And with it, you can shape a whole new future. Malon, ever the quiet wise one, gazed into the distance. The lightning's just one part of the bigger story, Corvin. But you learned the most important lesson. Real strength isn't in what you carry. It's in how you choose to use it. Corvin took a deep breath, feeling his friend's words echo in his chest. He had no clue what the future had in store, but one thing was clear. He wasn't alone anymore. The power inside him didn't define who he was, it was just something he could use for good. The lightning wasn't just some ancient force, it was a chance to rewrite his fate. And he was more than ready to do just that. With one last glance at the sky, Corvin knew that no matter how many battles or struggles were still ahead, he had what it took to face them. Not as some lost soul anymore, but as a leader, a protector, someone who finally understood what true strength meant. He'd found his purpose, and the lightning? That was just the beginning. As a soft breeze rolled in, carrying away the last whispers of the storm, Corvin felt something he hadn't in a long time, peace. Deep down, he knew that no matter what came next, he wouldn't fail. The lightning had become his ally, but more importantly, he had become the master of his own destiny. And so, with the road wide open ahead, Corvin and his friends walked toward the horizon, ready to face whatever came their way. The lightning would be their guide now, and with it, a whole new world was about to unfold. A world where choices, not power, would shape fate. The legacy of the lightning wasn't about destruction. It was about creation, transformation, and choice. And now more than ever, Corvin knew he had what it took to change the world around him. The lightning was just one piece of a way bigger story, and he was ready to write the next chapter. If you liked this story, don't forget to drop a comment, hit that like button, subscribe to the channel, and turn on the notifications for more epic stories like this. See you in the next video.